Hello again, and welcome back to Fullerton College's Print 101 class. This is Professor Ben Hewitt, and we're picking up where we left off talking about vector images as a part of our talk about prepress. Vector, if you remember, exists outside of the pixel type of imagery. Vector images cannot be photos or scanned pictures. Vector images are built by mathematic formulas inside the computer that determine places where shapes are, where the corners are, what the lines that connect those corners or points are, and if there's any curve to them. It also can determine if there's a color inside or not. And this sounds really strange to say it this way. This is essentially what Adobe Illustrator does. And you draw these points and lines and shapes and objects and fill them with colors. That is how it draws. And because you're using points and lines and shapes, and you're not using pixel data, that means that there is no resolution. And that's a good thing. None is pretty close to infinite in this point, where at any size you print one of these, no matter how big or how small you want it, the output will be the best possible resolution your printer can manage at that size, because it doesn't exist until you output it. The output device resolves the math of the vector and creates the line. It's kind of like if you told me to draw a square or to walk in a square or to drive a car in a square. I could do a square any size you want. I could draw it with a pencil on a sheet of paper, or I could drive a car hundreds of miles in 4 different directions. And in both cases, assuming the roads worked out, and maybe I should fly an airplane for this example instead, I can make the same shape with no loss of quality. It'll still look just like a square or just like a circle, no matter what size I make it, because this is not a picture. No, this is the DNA of a picture. This is instructions or blueprints for the computer on how to make the picture. And then when you go to press, it makes the picture. Let's talk composition programs. Before we talked about vector, because we're a little in a wonky order from our thing here, we talked about word processors and how programs like Microsoft Word and the other free versions like Google Docs and Star Office and Open Office and all those things, those are word processors. Those are basically typewriters, and they're meant to help you compose a document, write a report, edit your words and your sentences, maybe even help you with spelling along the way. But they are not meant to be used as professional graphics machines. Composition programs do what a lot of people think Microsoft Word does. Composition programs allow you to compose a document on your computer. If any of you have ever seen, maybe I'll include a video for this somewhere. I think I will. Look inside your class profile for a side video on PasteUp, so you can understand what a composition program is doing. A composition program is what replaced physical stripping in in print shops. It does the same things that the artist would have done using knives and rulers and rubber cement and light up tables and film, and it does it all on a computer in one place without that sweet, sweet rubber cement smell of my childhood. Anyways, composition programs, the big two on the market are in no particular order: Adobe InDesign and Quark Express. Kind of on the peripheral there as a third option is CorelDRAW, which exists as both an illustration program and a composition program. It's kind of a combination of Illustrator and InDesign. So what these things do, let's talk about the different parts of the composition program. The composition program allows you to, well, you can write in it if you want. You can type up text. You can import text from other places. You can manage that text, change its font, change its size, change its spacing, change its orientation, and do far more complicated controls to it than Word ever could. You can also include images. You can link in vector images like we talked about and pixel-based raster images. So photos and illustrations can be brought into your layout. You can adjust colors. You can do a few simple drawings in vector in here. You can add graphics, and you can make, one of the big things about this is you're capable of controlling the specific size and dimensions of your output. You know, you wouldn't think that requires explanation, but a lot of word processor programs do not allow you to easily or readily change the page size. And if they do, they try to limit you to predetermined normal sizes, which is all fine and dandy if you're just going to print it off an office printer, staple it in the corner, and hand it to your teacher and say, look, I did my book report. But if you're trying to create a book, you need to be able to do layout in interesting directions and sizes and dimensions and proportions that are going to work out for an actual book output. So the composition program allows you to do those more complicated layouts. It has things like drop-down menus. So if you click on the file, edit, and layout and those things across the top there, you get to have a bunch of menus, or a menu of basic tasks. There's a page grid. It's like a graph paper. Sometimes you can turn it on, you can see it. You can also turn it off and make it invisible. And the page grid gives you a way of lining things up so they look good. People like to see their information on a page orderly and lined up. Think about newspapers and magazines. For the most part, they're laid out nicely and neatly in kind of squarish grids. People like that. It's easy to read, it's easy to find your place, it's organized, and you can find what you're looking for rather quickly. Sometimes for kids magazines or really zany looking layouts, you have stuff that doesn't quite follow a grid, and that can be confusing, and people don't love that as much. There's a reason we've stuck to grids after thousands of years of writing and hundreds of years of printing. Okay, dialog boxes like the save as, these pop up and exist only when you need to make some input. So if you tell your computer to do something in the composition program, you say make a box, you get a little dialog that pops up and says, well, how big do you want it? If you try to save your file, you get a pop-up that says, well, what do you want to name the file? Naming and saving are very important. And lastly, you have palettes, which are small little flyout menus that you can keep floating around your screen and use when you want. There's for things like color swatches and sometimes links and page counts and things like that. Little bits of information you might want. The really cool designers out there always seem to have two monitors on their computer, so that one monitor has the document itself and the other monitor is covered in menus and palettes. And that's always cool. I've always wanted to do that, and I've not yet in my career had the opportunity to work on a multi-monitor computer. Maybe someday. Aw shucks. Let's talk about some problems here now, because in this book and in this class, we like to talk about the problems that exist. So prepress is all about making sure that what you think is going to happen when you're creating a document on the computer is actually what happens when you output it and make it to print. One of the biggest problems out there is something called font substitution. This is where you get a font that you did not choose or the designer did not choose if someone else sent you the file. This means the font didn't work right and another one is coming in instead. This is kind of like when they put things in your food that aren't your food. I'm always reminded and remind people of the really awful lawsuit against a fast food chain a while ago because their tacos said 100% beef and they weren't. And somehow they had a good enough lawyer that they were able to win their lawsuit saying the part of the beef that was 100% beef, even though the rest of the beef wasn't beef. You can't see my eyebrows right now, I forgot. But anyways, substitution. You don't want substitutes in your meat, do you? If you eat meat, if you don't, I'm sorry. You don't want substitutes in anything else. I mean, honestly, what tastes better? A Coke from Mexico that has real sugar in it, or the swill they sell here full of corn syrup? I'm not even talking about health benefits here. I'm just talking about pure taste. Corn syrup is a substitute for sugar. So are the other things they put in as artificial sweeteners. It's a substitution and it's never as good. Here's a very ugly sample I gave you of a font substitution. When you get the wrong fonts, the spacing is wrong. Did you know that a typeface is very much is the space between the letters so much as it is the shapes of the letters? In the same way that music is both the silence between the notes and the notes being played. It's the rhythm of on and off, of yes and no, of shape and void that makes a font. Using the same spacing on the wrong font, which happens sometimes in substitution, yields awful results. Also, it's easy to lose the end of a sentence or the end of a paragraph. See what I did there? Where the spacing will change and what used to fit on a page now breaks onto another page, or worse, breaks but doesn't move and just has a cutoff. Early on in my prepress career, I caught a mistake like this happening on one of the files a client had sent us. I had noticed that their slogan was supposed to say the best just got better, but the actual thing on there said the best just got bet dash. And I realized, looking at the proofs that I was being handed, that that particular file, the font was substituting and cutting off because it became too long. So it actually ruined their headline. So that was a good catch. I'm patting myself on the back here. I didn't always catch things that well. I wasn't always 100% perfect, but I remember my biggest successes, and I definitely remember my biggest failures from my days in industry. So font substitution you don't want. Also, one of the worst things with font substitution is not a font that's missing, but a font that the wrong version exists of. Everyone and their mother has their own version of Times New Roman. And if it's not the same version someone else was using, your computer might, just might, use the wrong version saying, yeah, name looks okay to me, and put it on, but it ends up not being anything the same. So that's font substitution. It's a problem that we look for in prepress. Font files. On the left, we have a true type, also now open type, and on the right, we have a bitmap version of a type 1 font. True type consists of only one file, which is the actual vector. We already talked about vector outlines. Did you know that typefaces are made out of vector? Those vector shapes get output on the press or the plate maker at the size that they're wanted, and they come out as clean as the thing can print. Bitmaps or raster or pixel-based letters are not good to print. They will never be a high enough resolution to look good. They will always look bad. Bitmap fonts used to exist only on the computer screen in the early days of computing, where A, the monitors didn't have the resolution, and B, the processor wasn't fast enough to make it worthwhile to preview a vector file to the user. That means that if you, the human at the keyboard, wants to see a vector on your computer, the computer has to actually translate all those mathematical formulas, solve all the equations, and show you the result on the fly as you scroll down the page. Modern computers can handle this for pages and pages of text, and you might be chuckling to yourself in disbelief that there was a time when a computer couldn't do that quickly. So the bitmap font was there on the computer screen, and the vector font would go to the printer, even though it was the same font. File management. How you save your files matters. This is one of those really boring, basic training things in prepress, but it makes or breaks you guys. This is like running laps to be good at a sport. Nobody likes running laps. Unless you're a runner, then, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. Go ahead, keep running your laps. I'm just going to go over here and hit baseballs and shoot baskets instead. It's much more fun than just running. Nobody likes the push-ups and all the warm-up exercises you do to be good at a sport, but they're necessary. Without them, you're not conditioned and you can't do a good job on the field. Same thing goes for file management on a computer. This is that really boring, mundane task that you need to do impeccably perfect, or else you're going to fail later. Two things about my image here. One, this is actually a really good sample of how I like to organize files. File folder hierarchies. You have a big folder and subfolders. And inside the subfolders, sometimes you have even more subfolders. So for me, anytime I have a project, I have project name. And inside that, I have a build file full of all the photos, and illustrations, and fonts I want to use. I have a working files folder full of the actual InDesign document. And I have an RTP, or ready to print folder. Or you might want to call it final, but that word's kind of cursed in the world of design. Don't use it, because then you end up with clients not really thinking it's final. Somehow using that ruins the world. So never call it final. It's just kind of a superstition here. But anyways, and inside the RTP folder should only be the one file that actually goes to press. If you organize your files well, you can come back tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next decade, and go back to an old file and print another copy. It happens either for you or for a client, where a year later, someone will say, you know what, we liked those business cards so much and I'm out. Can you just reprint those? And if you did a good job managing your files and you can find them again easily, that's an easy job and that's easy money. If you didn't, at one of my previous jobs, I took over for a designer who was a talented artist, but didn't manage his files well. And it would take me, without exaggeration, up to 4 hours to find the files that he used for projects because he didn't use subfolders. He had one file folder on the computer I took over called files. And he did a search function and tried to type in the names of the files he was looking for. That does not work. You can't waste hours searching for things. You got to keep them in the right places. And lastly, why is Sean Connery on here? Well, in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he talks about his journal, about how he wrote it down so he wouldn't have to remember. If you do a good job with your file management and you follow a good, strict file hierarchy and organization system, you never have to wonder where a file is. You can always go back to find it. And I will leave you with this one, a quote from my little brother, who's in computer graphics as well, although he does computer game design, not printing design like I do. And Daniel will always tell you, the worst coworker you will ever have is yourself from yesterday. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to leave you and we'll come back for one last video to wrap up this chapter.